What kinds of questions should we be asking in this moment that would help define the narrative of where we are and where we need to go today?
I'm actually going to steal a page out of Cortland's book because Cortland asks an important question that I think is still relevant right now, which is, do you want to be in protest or do you want to be in power, right? And I think that that, to me, is a central foundation for the type of questions, or as a preface for the type of questions that we have to ask related to this panel, which is the power to define, right? And I think another central spin-off question is, what is the terrain that we are willing to fight on, right? When I think about the terrain that we have to fight on, I think one of the beautiful things about the current terrain is that we are able to fight with sound bites in the digital age in a way that we have not been able to do before, especially when Dream Defenders was fighting on terrain, which was government property, right? As they sort of hijacked, took over, occupied the State House in Tallahassee, Florida, right? And I think that it is critical for us if we are going to define the terrain that we are fighting on, because right now we're fighting on the opposition terrain, right? We're on defense more than we are on offense. If we are going to define the terrain that we are fighting on, then that means that we have to become really bold and challenging in all of the spaces that we're at. I think right now we're good digitally, right? You know, like we figured out how to use, well, now it's called X, but you know what's Twitter, Black Twitter, right? But we figured out how to use Twitter to amplify our messages, to share narratives. We figured out in some cases also how to use mass media in that same vein. We haven't figured out how to use the courts like our opposition has. That's the terrain that they chose to fight on during the Trump era, right? We haven't figured out how to use the legislators, right? The vast majority of legislation of states are majority right, Republican, right? And that comes with all of the connotations. I'm not saying you have to be Democrat or Republican or whatever, you know, that whole spiel is. But it comes with a certain connotation when we think about the social and economic impact to black people inside of this country, right? In some cases, the political party matters. We have fought in the streets since Cortland time, Judy time, you know, Snick time. And so I don't think that we have stopped fighting inside of the streets. I do think that that there's something that the homie Mo Mitchell talks about, who's now the head of Working Family Party, when he talks about how there has to be a complementary electoral strategy to the movement's social justice strategy that we oftentimes are really good at. And he frames it this way. He says that we are really good at calling the question, right? Movement is really good at calling the question. George Floyd happened, Trayvon Martin happened, Mike Brown happened, Freddie Gray in my hometown happened, and we were really good at calling the question. We said, yo, does police need to exist? Do they need as much money? Should we be paying them to kill us, to terrorize us, to do all of these things? Is state-sanctioned violence a thing? Are they directly targeting black people, right? We were really good at calling the question. But Mo's assessment was that we were not good at answering the question. We did not have the level of power that was necessary to answer the question. Our opposition, in my viewpoint, does have the level of power necessary to answer the question. So when 2020 happened, Trump lost, Biden won, they didn't just ask questions around, did the election get stolen? They said, we're going to take the fight to the state level. We're going to answer the questions that we are asking. And so what is the terrain that we are now willing to fight on? That's what I believe that the power to define has to encompass, one of those central questions. The last piece that I'll say is that our job is to build a new majority. And I would even say that our job is to build a new supermajority, right? And so when we think about what democracy means inside of this country, right? When we talk about what a multiracial democracy is, Cortland talks about how at the time that they were running the freedom schools, that they was doing the boycotts, at the time that Freedom Summer was being launched, all of those things, they were not the majority, right? They were not the majority. Their job was to build a new majority. And so I think one of the central questions on the table for us is, are we prepared and ready to build a new majority? We are still by all accounts in this country, a young democracy. You know, if you want to call it a democracy, that's a whole nother argument that we could have. But yeah, different panel. Thank you. But if you want to call it a democracy, we are still, in relative terms, a young democracy, but still a democracy that that my mentor Bob Moses says still haven't figured out what it means to be a full citizen, especially as it relates to black people, right? And so I think one of the central questions that then out of that we have to ask is, what does it mean to truly be a part of a democracy inside of the United States of America? And what is the majority that we are willing to build? And I do think that it has to encompass this idea that we also have to have the level of economic power necessary to be able to contend. And I know I said that was the last thing, but I do want to just I feel like I ask a lot of questions like, well, where's the hope at, right? You know, that's a lot of questions that maybe still need to be out there. But I do think that there is a number of things that we have already defined inside of this country. One of which is I think Dee Dee first touched on it, this idea of public safety and the over-reliance on police as we think about public safety, particularly in black communities, but in communities at large. There are people that are running dope experimentations of what it means to keep our community safe that does not have to rely on just police. I know Rachel is doing that work in Florida right now, in Miami with the Healing Center, right? There's some homies out in California and Seattle. We're trying to figure out some shit in Baltimore, so, come help a brother out. Right, excuse my language, sorry, Elders. Some stuff in Baltimore. But the question that was called, particularly in 2020, right, or the new reiteration of it, help us to be able to define that police don't have to have so much money and that resources can, at bare minimum, be an experimentation moment for us to figure out what will actually keep our communities safe. And we know that in many cases, it's actually economic investment inside of these communities, right? Because folks want to talk about crime and all of that stuff. The second thing is the pandemic actually helped us to define what it means to have a base level income. I tell people all the time that as much as politicians and public officials like to say that universal basic income is impossible, these niggas gave us these folks gave us stimulus checks because we said that you need, my bad, we said that we needed there was a base level of income that was necessary, right? And because of the massive amount of unemployment, of corporations not staying true to their, folks were still getting rich while people was getting laid off, right? That the government recognized that one, corporations had to be held accountable in some way, but that there was a necessity to make sure that people underneath of a certain income threshold receive some amount of payment to be able to sustain their basic needs and necessities. We can argue about if it's enough because I did not get enough. I deserved a bigger check. I'm still waiting on my check, and that is separate from my reparations. But it was a moment, a win for us because we defined that. Black people in particular defined that. Right? We said that this is nothing new to us. Mutual aid is something that we have always done inside of our community. Y'all are just becoming hip to it, right? But the level of income that was necessary to be given to those who were poor and working class was a necessity at the moment. It was actually a beautiful moment for us to define that we need to be telling that narrative because right now they're saying Yang and all these other folks created a universal basic income, which is just not true. And the last thing is that we defined, at least for the first time, and Elders and Tiffany, Phil, and Dee Dee folks, correct me if I'm wrong, but we did define a national election for the first time that I can remember, right? Where for the first time, a candidate, president-elect, said that black people got him elected. Black people got him elected, right? That was a major moment, and it means that the black vote can really contend with the powers that be, even as a minority, quote unquote, in this country, right? And so we have to begin to, one, tell that story, share that victory, but also be clear that we defined an election. And we can do it again if the money is right, if what you are saying is backed up by your actions, and if you're willing to give me my reparations check.